Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most complex and persistent conflicts in modern history, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Our goal here is to build a structured, foundational understanding. We're going to walk through the key events, the pivotal moments, and the core issues that define it all. So, where do you even begin with a story like this? Well, the only place to really start is with this central question that hangs over everything. How did this all begin? The roots of this conflict, they run deep, stretching back well over a century and revolving around land, identity, and two competing national movements.
To get our heads around that, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the origins, then look at how states and borders were literally shaped by war. From there, we'll dive into the cycle of uprisings and peace attempts, break down those core issues that are still unresolved, and finally, we'll bring it all together to understand where the conflict stands today.
All right, let's jump right in with Section 1, the origins. We're going to explore how political movements that started way over in 19th century Europe kind of unexpectedly set the stage for a major conflict in the Middle East.
A really key concept to grasp right off the bat is Zionism. As a political movement, it grew out of this climate of intense and rising anti-Semitism in Europe. Its central goal? To establish a national home for the Jewish people in their ancestral land, which at the time was part of the Ottoman Empire, known as Palestine.
And this timeline, it just shows you how quickly things escalated. You see the Zionist movement getting formally organized in 1897, and then just 2 decades later, you get Britain's huge Balfour Declaration. After World War I, Britain is in charge, and under their mandate, large-scale Jewish immigration starts happening. Well, this created more and more tension with the local Arab population, and it all finally boiled over into a major Arab revolt in the late 1930s. All of this tension really set the stage for our next section. The creation of states, the drawing of borders by war, and of course, the birth of a refugee crisis that is still unresolved to this day.
This slide just perfectly illustrates the gap between the plan and the reality. On the left, you've got the 1947 UN partition plan. It proposed 2 states, Jewish leaders accepted it, Arab leaders rejected it. The war that followed created the map you see on the right, the 1949 armistice lines. Israel was established but on more territory than the plan suggested. And the rest of the land? It was left under Egyptian and Jordanian control. This was a map drawn not by diplomacy, but by war.
And the human cost of that war, it was just immense. We're talking about roughly 750,000 Palestinians who either fled the violence or were expelled from their homes in what became Israel. For Palestinians, this is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, and it's the very beginning of the Palestinian refugee crisis, an issue that's right at the heart of the conflict today. Just under 2 decades later, another war completely redrew the map again. In the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, along with East Jerusalem. This marks the beginning of the Israeli military occupation of these territories. The decades that followed were really defined by this difficult cycle. On one hand, you had Palestinian uprisings against the occupation, and on the other, you had these major international efforts to try and broker peace, which ultimately were unsuccessful.
To really understand this period, we have to define intifada. The word is Arabic for shaking off, and it describes 2 huge popular Palestinian uprisings. The first intifada started in 1987 and was mostly characterized by civil disobedience and protests. But the second intifada, which started in 2000, was a much more violent conflict.
Now, the most significant diplomatic effort of this whole era was the Oslo Accords in the 1990s. This was a groundbreaking, step-by-step process. I mean, it led to mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO, the group representing the Palestinian people. It also created the Palestinian Authority for limited self-rule. But here's the critical flaw. It kicked all the toughest issues down the road. Jerusalem, refugees, borders, all of that was deferred. The thinking was, hey, let's build some trust on the small stuff first, then maybe we can solve the big ones.
Well, that later never really came. The 2000 Camp David summit, with President Bill Clinton hosting, failed to produce a final agreement. The collapse of those talks was almost immediately followed by the outbreak of the Second Intifada. And just like that, the Oslo era came to a violent and tragic end.
So now that we have all that historical context, let's slow down and really look at those fundamental issues that were left unresolved. These are the core points of contention that keep fueling the conflict and preventing any kind of lasting resolution.
First and foremost, you have to talk about the status of Jerusalem. The city is sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and it's claimed as a capital by both Israelis and Palestinians. It's an issue with just immense religious, political, and emotional weight. And as you can see, the competing claims are deeply entrenched. Israel considers all of Jerusalem its complete and united capital. The Palestinians, on the other hand, want East Jerusalem, which was captured in 1967, as the capital of their future state. Meanwhile, the international consensus, for the most part, views East Jerusalem as occupied territory.
The second major obstacle is the presence and continued expansion of Israeli settlements. So, these are communities built for Israeli citizens in the territories that were occupied back in 1967, mainly the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
The impact of these settlements is just profound. Today, you have over 700,000 settlers living in these territories. Now, the international community generally considers them illegal under international law, and on the ground, they fragment Palestinian land, creating what some people have called a Swiss cheese effect, which makes establishing a viable connected Palestinian state incredibly difficult.
Finally, we come to the profoundly emotional and complex issue of the Palestinian refugees. We're talking about those displaced in 1948 and 1967, and their millions of descendants who now live in camps and communities all across the region.
This slide right here captures one of the most difficult existential dilemmas of the entire conflict. On one side, Palestinians assert a right of return to their ancestral homes, a right that's supported by a UN resolution. On the other side, Israel sees the return of millions of refugees as a demographic threat to its very identity as a Jewish-majority state. It's a direct clash of foundational narratives, the Palestinian quest for justice versus the Israeli imperative for self-preservation.
So this brings us to our final section, how all these unresolved issues manifest in the conflict today, creating what is a deeply fractured political and geographical landscape.
The current landscape is really defined by three key realities. First, there's a deep political split, with the Palestinian Authority governing parts of the West Bank while the militant group Hamas controls Gaza. Second, a severe land, air, and sea blockade has been imposed on Gaza by Israel and Egypt since 2007. And third, these factors have contributed to recurring cycles of devastating violence, including the major war that began in October 2023.
So to sum it all up, what began as a conflict over how to partition land has evolved into the management of a protracted military occupation, now the longest in modern history. And the peace process that once offered a glimmer of hope, it's been stalled for well over a decade, with no clear diplomatic path forward.
And this leaves us with the ultimate question. After walking through the history, the wars, the failed negotiations, and the core issues, the question is no longer just how the conflict began, but what a path toward a just and lasting resolution could possibly look like for both peoples.